The soft scrape of lacquered slippers on stone, a silken hush against the ancient floor, told Varys he had misjudged the length of night. Candles had burned low in their cups. Their wax pooled like spilled milk along the copper dishes, and the spider could taste tallow in the air. Bitter, fatty, a reminder of small economies and careful turns. Far below his hidden door, the Red Keep exhaled, a fortress breathing in sleep, its galleries and guards unwinding to the nocturne rhythm that kept it alive. He listened, head bent, pawns gliding over the seams of a cupboard, until he found the spring. A panel shifted in the wall with a sigh like a servant made bold to gossip. "Careful," he murmured to the darkness, because that made it kinder. Two little ones emerged from the crawl space with lanterns, no larger than a man's palm. The girl's hair had been shorn blunt and ragged by a knife, as if the knife had been embarrassed to try at neatness. The boy was all elbows and flying freckles. They looked to him the way sparrows look to open windows. He shook his sleeves down, tucked them away, and made himself smaller. What did we learn tonight? The boy, unable to keep still even under the freight of a secret, shifted from foot to foot until the girl struck him with a look so sharp it cut. He swallowed his restlessness. The fat one with the yellow hair. No, not that one. The one who smells of cloves and keeps pinching the cupbearer. He boasted that he saw something under the river. Chains, new chains. Good, Varys said. That name he did not require. There were a dozen men with yellow hair who pinched, and most were coward. And you? The girl spoke without flourish. The alchemists have moved their old jars from the undercellar of the painted table room to a cold vault close to the king's gate. But they are not all there yet. The thin one, Hallan, he is afraid to walk carrying them because of the sparks from the forge. The hand ordered new barrels brought in the day after a raven from the Hayford Road. They watch them at night by pairs. He made a little sound of approval. 2 threads, and a third he could guess. He did not ask whether the hand had coughed or laughed, or whether he had shouted, or if he had struck any man. Tyrion Lannister did not show all his teeth when he smiled, nor did Varys. Between them lay the city, and the city was made of skins stretched over bones of old kings and new appetites. The hand had set out to make a trap here, in this sorrow of stone and river, and the trap would be clever. Tyrion made clever things, but cleverness had its odor, and Varys knew it well. It smelled faintly of pride. "Well done," he told his small birds, and from the folds of his robe he drew sweetness, honey, sugar, and stiff paper. Almonds. A fig each, wrinkled as an elder's secrets. Their eyes lit, their mouths opened like pockets. "When?" the girl asked without asking. He smiled. "Soon." When they had gone, he snuffed 2 of the candles and left one to die on its own. For the length of that flame's life, he closed his eyes and counted the slow erasures of its light. He had learned to measure time in meltings and drips, in the quiet throb of wounded things. The city was wounded. The realm was worse. In the east, Illyrio's letter lay under a sealing weight on his desk, perfumed with oils that reminded him of quayside nights and barges fat with spices, and men who swore by their mothers while they sold other men's children. He had not broken the seal. Aegon, the letter claimed. Aegon Dachshall. A good name, a name with teeth, a name to bite into the soft parts of memory. He had watched them all once. Ares with his cracked fingers and raw tongue, Rhaella gentle and thin, Rhaegar with that inward look that kept kings and minstrels company. And then he had watched the Red Keep burn in places no one else noticed, watched the first fever sparks in the pantry cellars, the boy swaddlings, the coin sacks, the peddlers of Providence. He had known men's plans to save and be saved. They wrote them with elegant quills, with scheming hands, with knives set under silk. Aegon. What a lovely thing to promise, like a lamp trimmed and held up in fog. Varys did not pick it up. He had written many letters of his own these past months, careful chords cast across black water. At first, the chords had sought to sound the depth. Then they sought to pull. He glanced again at the one candle he had left. It had dwindled to a stub, struggling against its own pool. His mouth tasted of tallow and old apples. He remembered a different light, a red light like a wound, pulsing from a priestess's throat when she sang of a king. The memory made him colder than the room. "I do this for the realm," he whispered, and the words were not new. Their shapes were worn smooth by handling. But tonight, they felt different, as if they had put on mail. He took up his quill. In his own hand, with a careful looseness that mimicked a merchant who had grown soft with late success, he wrote 3 short sentences to accompany the longer one that mattered. A boat lay ready under the cliffs. A boy would carry, a man would pilot, and a gray gull would land at dawn with letters thin as fish skins. He wrote slowly, because writing slowly made liars of the nervous and the eager, and truth was a thing he reserved for people who would never know they had it. The longest line he wrote twice, in 2 different inks, and let them dry, and held them to candle flame until they browned just a little along the edges. He sanded the paper lightly and folded it around a stick of cinnamon, so that opening it would make a smell that disguised other smells. He could see the man who would read it, the jaw like a carpenter's mallet, the eyes like unslept nights. "Come and take your city." He signed another name to the bottom. Not his, never his. The man who would read it would not trust that name either. He would trust, if anything, the facts. So Varys gave him facts. The chain is nearly complete and lies drowned across the river. The pyromancers have prepared, but their jars are old. The city watch is not as it was when Jon Arryn was hand. There are men who will open doors. He paused, quill suspended, and considered one more truth. It felt like a pebble in the shoe of a careful plan. He dropped it in anyway. The boy is no king. He sanded the letter, and his hand shook for a moment. Only a moment, and then was still again. Across the chamber, in shadow, the letter from Pentos waited unopened. Aegon's name on it glowed faintly in brass by the last light of the candle. "I'm sorry," Varys said to no one, and broke his candle to put it out. Dawn at Dragonstone smelled of rock and salt and rotting seaweed. The gulls were as numerous as the stones, and the stones were as numerous as the rumors that swam through the holdfast from men who had learned that believing was less expensive than knowing. Davos Seaworth stood with his hands in his sleeves and his shoulders hunched against the wind. The tide had fallen away and left the long black approach a slick set of bones. He thought of how poor men learned to walk such bones without breaking their necks. He had been a poor man long enough that he still counted his steps. The boy came when the sun was a smear behind a veil. He was soaked to the waist and proud of it. The cinnamon stick letter, wrapped in oilcloth and ambition, rode in his mouth as if his teeth were a seal. Davos dried the boy's hair with his own cloak, because old habit made him incapable of letting a child shiver in a doorway while he held something of value in his hand. Stannis Baratheon stood by the painted table with his hands clasped hard enough to blanch the knuckles. The candlelight made his face into a carving. He watched Davos red as a farmer watches weather. Melisandre's red smile curved in a corner of the room, a shadow that warmed itself. The king's crown, plain and hard, lay on the table's edge, like a promise Stannis had not yet made to himself. "The chain," Davos said softly. He had never learned to enjoy the sound of his own voice in such company. "You will not like it, your grace, but it is the sort of thing the imp would do." "Berin." Stannis took the letter without asking. He did not look at Melisandre. He did not look at Davos. His eyes went down the page as if it were a ledger of debts. "The boy's no king," he read, and the last word cut short as if the sentence had hit a wall. "That we knew." He looked up then, and his gaze moved past Davos, past the woman in red, to a point on the far wall where none of them stood, as if he could stare a memory into making sense. The chain, the jars, doors. Davos cleared his throat. He had learned, long ago, that Stannis did not want your suggestions. He wanted the calculus that justified them. If there are doors to open, there are men to open them. Doors inside the city mean you can take it as a man takes a purse, with a quiet hand. If the chain is across the river, you do not commit your whole strength to a trap you can see. The pyromancer's jars. Here, a shadow slid behind his eyes, the memory of green fire and ships, and screaming, as if it were all yet to come. are better avoided than proven false. All the blood of Blackwater Bay would ride on that falsehood if it is false. Melisandre's chuckle was low. Fear is an old god, Sir Onion. It whispers like the sea under your old dock. What is written here is not the truth you need. The truth you need is that the cold is coming down the spine of the world, and the night that will eat all shipments. Win or lose your city. What then, if you have no fire to meet true dark? Davos held himself. Her voice was a silk rope. He'd been poor enough to know how to avoid ropes. King on a throne commands more bread and arrows than a king on a rock. A rock endures, she said, smiling. Bread rots, arrows snap. Stannis laid the letter down. He did not touch the crown. Who sent this? Davos thought of lies and discarded them. A friend to the realm. One who knows the bowels of King's Landing as if he had made them. Varys, Melisandre said, like a name she found unpalatable. The eunuch. Stannis considered the word friend as if it were foreign coin. Suspect of lead. He served Aerys? He serves the boy now. He serves safety, Davos said. Or the idea of it. Or himself, I don't know. But he has done this city's dirty work for so long that his hands are cleaner than the rest, by virtue of constant washing. And he asks me to be his towel. Stannis murmured. It was as much humor as he permitted himself. Davos risked a half-pace nearer. He tells us what we would pay dearly to learn otherwise. If the chain is drowned, and the jars are watched, and the watch is not one piece, then we can make our choices with eyes open. I will take 200 men in skiffs on the turn of the tide, and find those doors, your grace. If there are chains and if there is fire, we can bleed less by going where the river cannot clutch us. Nah. And if his doors lead to rooms full of knives? Stannis asked. Then we will die, Davos said simply. But your army will not die behind us, on water that laughs at men who pretend it is a road. A strip of dawn peeled free from the clouds and lay pale across the painted table. The painted rivers gleamed. The red woman's shadow glimmered like a fish 2 inches beneath clear water. Stannis set both hands on the edge of Westeros and gripped the wood. In the belly of a fish, he said. Jonah prayed to a god who had swallowed him. He looked at Melisandre. Your god does not have a belly, I think. He has only a mouth. He consumes what is false, she said mildly. Then let him consume my doubts and leave this letter. Stannis' gaze went back to the page. We will take the city by its locks and hinges. You will go, Davos. The lion's chain and fire will be left hungry. He did not add the words he was thinking. And if Varys lies, I will find him among his candles and end his whispering with a louder silence. Stannis did not talk about the things that would please him. He only did them. When the news found Tyrion Lannister, it came on the breath of a terrified boy who had been caught sleeping by an open shutter where barn swallows had nested. The boy spoke to a guardsman. The guardsman spoke to a sergeant. The sergeant, who had once lost 3 fingers to a millstone, and was therefore sure still madness could hurt as much as moving gears, came to the hand with his cap crushed in one hand, as if it had become the enemy he wished to break. They say the river is full of boats, my lord, he panted. Small ones, not the king kind. The other kind, my lord, with oars like crying. Tyrion closed his eyes. The chain. He had drenched his own days in plans for it, and knew the precise taste of iron that lingered on a man's tongue when he had breathed too much of the chainsmith's craft. He had watched it lowered, link by link, his vanity descending into the water with it, disguised as prudence. He had waited for the stirring in the river that would tell him it was taut. He had counted jars and barrels, and frightened alchemists like a miser counts wives. And now boats that smelled of onions and night were sliding along the city's flanks, looking for places where stone remembered how to be tender. Wake Bronn, he said, and the Kettleblacks, and the other Kettleblacks if the first lot are already drunk in the wrong tavern. Send to the mud gate. No, send to every gate, and you, tell my sister that there is a river. My lord, she knows. Then tell her again. He regretted the last instruction an instant after giving it. Information had a way of turning to wine in Cersei's mouth, and once it was wine, it was harder to throw. But in moments like this, the city did not run on prudence. It ran on noise. If people were afraid of the wrong things, they would be too busy to notice the right ones. When he reached the outer parapet, he found Hallen of the king's pyromancers pulling his sleeves as if he could unwind his worry that way, and next to him, a ragged half-circle of men who had come to watch a battle, the way they would watch a bear baiting. The river was dull, pewter. The chain slept beneath it, like the baby of a proud mother, largely unseen except for the occasional ripple that suggested a hidden strength. There, Bronn grunted and pointed with his chin, like lice on a lady's comb. The boats did look like that, multiplying in every place there was shelter. They kept to the edges where the river's breath was broken by jetties and pilings. No standard rode their bows. No drums beat. The sound of their oars was the sound of men trying not to get noticed by water. "They'll not get close with the fire," Helen stammered. When the signal, once the order is..." "The order," Tyrion said, "is to be clever before being brave." He narrowed his eyes. Oars bit and bit again. In a few places, he thought he saw lines thrown, grapnels that found purchase. A door was a door even when it wore stone over its face. A city that had been sacked 3 times learned to make little lips along its margin, where contraband and cowards could go in and out. He had employed some of those lips himself when it suited him. Now someone else's mouth drank from them. "Archers," Tyrion said, and a captain sprinted away. It felt strange that his voice could still climb above the world and perch there. He had never thought that he would grow so used to command. Not to waste arrows into water, tell them to bleed any man who shows his head near a wall. Not to shoot unless they can take an eye. Put men at the gatehouse and behind the gatehouse, because men at the gatehouse will forget to be men. "And the chain?" Bronn said. Tyrion swallowed dry air. "Wait. Let it sit. The chain is for ships. These are wasps. And if the wasps are carrying fire..." Bronn's lazy drawl saved him from giving any order at all for a moment. "Then they will die in their boats and stink, and the stink will be ours to live with. And I will write a pretty letter to every fishmonger and ask him to be patient with me." Tyrion licked his lips, which had suddenly become a desert. "What I fear is not their fire. It is their doors." Varys watched men in gray from a place no man in gray could have found without a guide. The boy who had brought him the note from a boy who had brought a note from another boy who had been paid by a woman who knew where the poor went to hide. All the strings had been drawn taut. Someone would cut them. That was the nature of strings. Before that, he wanted to hear them sing. He did not look toward the door he had promised. Promises were best kept in the dark, like pickled grapes. He wrapped a shawl around his head and let his hands drift as if they had entrails to read. The smell of the city at dawn was always the same. A broth of meat turned, smoke, sour beer, piss, and underneath it all the faint iron of the river. Somewhere far above, bells jangled as if a hand had lost its rhythm. The first screams were not battle screams. They were market screams, women scolding. Then a man shouted a name, and the name had too many letters to be common, and had fear to season it. Then came the other screams. He watched the first door open from the other side. It did not open like a door in a story opens, at once and wide. It opened like a wound, a cautious slit, then a gulp, then a push, and out from it came 3 men who moved as if each believed the others were figments. They wore no colors he could read, and their beards were common. Their eyes were stung by the city's light. They were almost disappointed to find that they were in King's Landing and not some more special place they had imagined would make taking the city less work. Varys noticed the man who came after them, the one who ducked under the low lintel as if the door might change its mind and become a blade. He had the half-minted look of a man who had been broken by labor and glued back together with salt air. His face was honest because he did not have time for any other. He had lost fingers. He had not lost care. Davos Seaworth looked once at the alley as a whole, and then at each face in it, and then at the sky to learn how much weather had a say in the next hour. Men who survived were all sky readers and face readers. They could tell you when a squall wore a mask. He gave a sign behind him and did not look back to see whether it was obeyed. 2 more men came, lighter on their feet. One of them broke into a smile when the first city cat ran over his shoe. Davos did not smile. The cat would tell its friends, overhear what it could, and reveal none of it. But cat's movements made men think of softness, and softness made mistakes. He wanted men thinking of hinges and angles, and which way a door would swing if you pushed it wrong with a shoulder. They moved like water moves down a groove. The groove had been cut by coin and rumor months ago. If you tilted a city just right, men you had never met would slide along channels they did not know had been made for them. They reached the inner court of the dry well at a run that sounded louder than it was, because fear amplifies the footfall inside your own head. Davos put his palm on the well's stone lip. It had been worn smooth by generations widening their circle. He liked things that told you who had touched them. They found the postern gate behind the old ash store, where a door had been walled over and then unwalled by men who remembered a famine 3 reigns back. 2 boys held it open with their backs. "I know you," Davos told one of the boys, which was a lie. He knew his shape, because sailors recruit boys with shapes like that for masts. The boy took the compliment as a knighting and stood taller. With the first door open, the others were more work. They always are. A city is not a garment that comes off in one pull. It is a skin that sticks. Davos left 2 men at each place where the city met itself, because that was how one held a seam. By mid-morning, the river had learned about the chain, the way a beast learns about a snare that holds its leg. It bucked against it and tore flesh on steel. No ships came on, not yet. The city's defenders breathed easier without daring to call it ease. Archers surged to high places. Knives went missing from kitchens. A rumor that Stannis had ridden across the river on the back of a fish, the size of a house, rattled a taverner's wife into dropping a pitcher. At the great city of Baelor, Septus combed the hair of statues and spoke to them in urgent whispers that did not sound like prayers. Sansa Stark watched the air from her lattice window as if it were a tapestry that could change its story if she stared hard enough. She felt for the line, always, where fear became excitement. In songs, that line was drawn in gold. In life, it was drawn in chalk. You stepped over it by mistake and looked down to find your foot had smeared it all away. There were new sounds today. She had learned the city's ordinary dread. This dread was different. It was too quiet to be a sally and too organized to be a riot. In the yard below, men in half armor moved as if they were practicing something they had forgotten they knew. She had done that once, with a dance. Her body finding steps it had been taught when it believed it was learning something else. Her mother used to say that grief made a girl remember all the small things. Sansa remembered needlework and her father's voice in the yard, and the way snow demanded delicacy from a foot. And she remembered that the men who had smiled so handsomely at her had turned their smiles into knuckles without warning. She pressed her cheek to the carved latticework. Once, she would have closed her eyes and made a wish for the right knight to appear at the right moment. Now she made no wish. Wishes made a girl sweet. Sweetness made a girl easy to eat. She watched, and that was her new version of wishing. When the bells tolled noon, Tyrion was below the gatehouse arguing with a man who had fallen in love with a particular interpretation of his orders and could not be talked out of it. The man wanted to close the gate. Tyrion wanted him to close the gate at the right time. Between those two things lay the difference between a tactic and a tantrum. He had sweat running along his back and could taste iron and chicken from the sandwich he had devoured with contempt 2 hours ago. He wanted a chair. He wanted, absurdly, to be back in a different place where his sister was a small girl and not yet mean, and our father was a tower and not yet a wound, and I believed that words could keep me whole. Bronn said, "Hear that?" and cocked his head. "I hear a city losing its patience with itself," Tyrion said. "No," Bronn said. "Listen. There." It was a door. Not this door. A door no one had told them would matter. Tyrion had told half the city to watch half the city, and here a scrap of wood and metal reminded him that halves make rooms, and rooms hide other rooms. He took one step toward the sound, then another. There was an echo in the stone that told him the direction of things, the way a hound knows which alleys toss bones into the street. They turned a corner and found a man in gray holding a spear, as if it had become a broom. The man's eyes darted, the way men's eyes do when they expect to see blood coming even from empty air. Tyrion raised a hand. He had learned by now that a dwarf approaching two armed men would be considered either a danger or a joke, and one of those two could be used to disarm the other. "Good day," he said lightly. "Do be careful. The city is full of people who wish to hit you with something sharp and then steal your shoes. Better to keep your feet in them until the evening, when we will all be squinting to see who we've killed." The man blinked. Bronn grunted a word that was not a word, but did the work words sometimes did, and the spear lowered a finger's width. The door behind the man was not a proper door. It was a shutter that had learned to pretend. Tyrion filed that away in the part of his mind where he kept grudges and recipes for survival. Inside the shutter, stone breathed cold. Tyrion thought of Varys, because the darkness felt like the man. He did not smile. He saved his humor for men who believed their cleverness a blade, and their blade a prayer. Varys had neither illusions. Varys was a pillow that smothered you while whispering apologies. "Close it," Tyrion told the man. "Prop it. Leave two men with it who can count to 30 without moving their lips. And if anyone tries to come out this way, stab them?" the man asked, eager to be useful. "Talk to them if they look like someone's mother," Tyrion said. "Stab them if they look like me." The man glanced at him in confusion. Bronn smirked. Tyrion moved on because time had started to step quicker, slapping its feet, and he needed to keep near the parts of the city where decisions found hands to wear. Varys slipped along a passage that had not been in any plan until he whispered it into existence a year ago when a carpenter needed coin. He did not hurry. Hurrying told a city you were afraid, and cities like to eat fear. He found the old mason's stair where the lime sacks had been kept in Maegor's time. Its steps had known more prisoner feet than lawful ones. He descended until the wall grew sweat, and the noises of the day flatlined into a damp hush. Here, men had confessed to gods that did not listen. Here, men had fallen quiet from very loud. The jailer at the next corner licked his thumb before turning his key. Varys had watched that thumb often enough to know which chapped place would crack in dry weather. The jailer did not look up. He had learned the eunuch's shape, the way a man learns the weight of a familiar jug. He suspected nothing larger than a request for a prisoner moved for a trial that would never happen. "Open this one," Varys murmured. "And that one, and not the third. Not today." "Pycelle," the jailer said, surprised despite himself. "No," Varys said softly. "And if anyone asks, you were asleep, and your keys were stolen by a very quiet dream." The man chuckled. Men chuckled around Varys because he made fear sound like a trivial kindness one could perform by holding still. The first door gave up a man whose face was a map of reasons never to ask a woman how she had lived. He squinted, and the light made him a child for a breath. Varys steadied him with a touch as light as a moth. "You will keep to the passage to the end," he said. "Turn left where the rats have chewed an arrow into the lime, and find a blue door. You will knock twice, and a boy will give you a loaf of bread. You must share it." He pressed a small bundle into the man's palm. It contained a broken bit of mirror and a sprig of mint. Men panicked less when they could make themselves taste like someone who had not been forgotten. "Go." The second door opened onto a woman whose hair had fallen out in grief. She held her head as if she were cradling a child that had been mistreated by ghosts. Varys did not tell her to hurry. He knew the speed a broken body could afford. He did not open the third door. Not today. Behind it slept a dangerous kindness he could not use yet. The city needed its kindness rationed the way it rationed grain. When he rose again into air that knew the names of streets, he found the sun hunched behind a braid of cloud, and the river wearing glints like a jeweler who was not above cheating. He turned into a house whose shutters had been painted shut against the winter before last, and heard the sound of a man's boots pressed very carefully into the wood of a small room in which a large man was trying to be small. The large man was Janos Slynt. He smelled like a butcher's lucky day. "You," Janos said, as if accusation could shrink debt. "I have not seen you. You have not come to see me. I could have used a friend." Varys nodded gravely. "I sent you 3, he said gently. "And you did not like any of their teeth." Janos went a dark red that looked unhealthy even on a face that had never learned moderation. "They came with ideas. Better than coming with knives," Varys said. "Though these days one must appreciate both." Janos stared at him. You smell green, you know that? Like a garden. The men laugh about it. They may, Varys said. If they leave my children alone. Your children, Janos repeated, as if the idea offended him by its quaintness. The city will bleed today. Perhaps the gutters will fill more on one side than the other. Perhaps not. You want me to guess where to stand so that I look best when the Lord of Light eats my shadow? Ben Terwande. I want you to stand where your sons will still have a father, Varys said. If a certain gate were to open at a certain hour, and a certain number of men with onion breath were to pass through it without pausing to pet the cats, there would be work afterward for men who are not particular. A city newly taken needs guards who can keep a crowd busy. I know those men. He let his voice glide. I know the men who will decide whether those guards wear cats on their cloaks or stags. Janos' lips moistened without help. He wrestled with the notion of a future that did not end in someone else's choice. And you came to me because you are not a man to die for colors, Varys said. You are a man to live for coin. And if you live discreetly for coin today, you may live richly for it tomorrow. Open the old fish market gate when the bells for the mother's midday meal have been rung exactly twice. Not before, not after. If you fail to hear those bells, because you are in bed with a woman who has convinced you her bells are better, there will be fewer men leaving bread at your table in the years to come. Dendero. Janos swallowed, a rough sound. I could tell the hand. You could tell the hand that a man with soft hands asked you to do a hard thing, Varys said. He stepped back, letting the room breathe. And then the hand would do a hard thing to you. But I'm not asking you because I think you brave. I'm asking you because I think you prudent. A prudent man listens to bells. Then, by the time the bells rang twice, the city had begun to wobble on its axis. Not enough to fall. Enough to make children seasick. Tyrion stood on the causeway of the King's Gate and watched a line of men in home-woven cloaks jog across a yard that had been a training ground yesterday and a prediction this morning. He had sent messengers to the Hound and received back the intelligence that the Hound preferred fire he could see to rumors and intended to stay put until someone showed him a flame to bite. He had laughed, and the laugh had tasted like blood. He heard the second bell and felt it in his chest. Sound takes the shortest route to the heart when it passes through stone. He did not think of mothers. He thought of doors. Davos heard it too. He paused in a passage where two cracks crossed like wayward roads and lifted his hand to the men behind him, because the gesture he made had once been used to quiet boys on a mast and therefore carried an authority that tasted of wind. He could smell fish. He took a breath that scoured his throat and felt his heart thud in time with metal. He had no love of bells. He had known them when they were attached to ropes that told you how long a storm intended to love you. They moved on the second bell like water finding a drop. Dot. The door at the old fish market gate had been mended with new nails that still remembered hammers. It opened before the hinge creaked because men had been stationed there with their hands on the wood as if it were a beast one had to soothe. They slid through, and in that moment, the river and the city made a handshake. The gold cloaks posted at the outer yard looked up, and three of them looked down again, as if they had seen farther than their eyes wanted to go. Thorth lifted his spear. The first blood of the day in that place landed on Davos' cuff. He wiped it, because men are comforted by gestures that make no difference. The yard filled with the sound of men losing the argument with their training. He would have liked to stop and tell each one that a breath saved at the beginning could be spent at the end when you most needed rich air, but men did not hear lessons while their bodies were occupied with fear. He let them be brave as best they could. On the ramparts above, a member of the Kettleblack family, who had once been named something else by a mother who did not believe in luck, put an arrow where he thought it would find a throat and found an ear instead. The man he shot fell to his knees and wept with a child's surprise. The Kettleblack shook his head and tried again. Varys sat in a chair in a house where a pot had been set to boil with nothing in it, so that it would steam at the right moments to suggest ordinary life. He listened to the city learn its new notes. He heard, far away, a woman's voice rise in a song with no words. He thought of Rhaegar, and dismissed the thought sternly, as if it had been an unruly passion. He had not permitted himself many of those. The few he had allowed had cost more than whores and less than wars. which was to say exactly enough to ensure he would be paying forever. The door opened, and a small, sweating man came in without looking back to see whether he had been followed. He was one of those minor officials who acquire immense importance on days when men decide names for other men. He had been given a task the way a mule is given a load, without permission or explanation. And now he wanted to complain about his sore shoulders. Varys fed him wine and sympathy and a lie that tasted like an old truth. "We will all be better when the city no longer rattles with foreign chains," he promised, and saw the man's resentment reposition itself like a chest moved to another corner of a room. "At sunset," the man told him, forgetting that he had not been asked. "At sunset, if it is done by then, the sept will ring a new bell for the new king." "How ceremonial," Varys murmured, and watched the lie he had said 3 weeks ago sprout its single useful leaf. His small bird had been a septon's valet. The valet had learned to miscount bells in a way a septon would applaud. In Maegor's Holdfast, Cersei Lannister stood at a window and stroked the heavy stem of a goblet, as if it were a throat she meant to claim. Her hair caught light and turned it into a weapon. She had dressed as if today were a feast, because an enemy could never know whether she was celebrating his defeat or her own audacity. "If my son had been born a man," she told the room, "this would be a story with a different ending." The only person in the room who laughed was the man who had learned that laughter in those chambers cost more than blood elsewhere. He brought the sound up and then strangled it in his own throat before it could become a thing she could hate. He made himself useful by remarking on nothing at all. "Your Grace," Varys said, and smiled with the tired sadness of a nurse who has coaxed too many fevers into mildness. "The gates hold, the river has chosen not to drown, and the hand breathes. These are the organs of the city, and they yet live." "You always speak like a man patting a horse," Cersei said, sipping. Her hair glowed, and her mouth did not. "You tell it how fine it is so it does not bite you. But horses bite anyway." "Meneter. I once had my fingers nibbled by a donkey," Varys offered, as if she had asked for this memory. "It improved my ability to play the lute." "I did not know you played the lute." Cersei's voice curled around the word fear and squeezed it until it became anger. "Have you always played at things, Lord Varys?" He bowed slightly. "I am only a man who likes music, Your Grace, and order." "Order," she repeated. Outside, someone screamed a name in a voice that had cracked itself. She glanced at the window and did not move closer to it, because she knew that men who came to save women enjoyed finding them helpless near windows. "My father would have called the order you love cowardice." "Your father," Varys said softly, "made certain sorts of order by moving mountains. I have always been partial to moving pebbles." He inclined his head. "My work suits a flatter hand." She studied him. She possessed the rare ability to pick out from a room full of enemies the one who would do the least damage by remaining near, and she had chosen him again and again. She despised him for it. She kept him for it. He wondered which of those things would save him if it came to it. "Go," she said finally. "Make your music. But if the city burns, I will have you carried to its highest tower and dropped into what remains of the river. If there is no chain, you will float away. If there is a chain, you will learn how well you swim." He bowed again and left, and when he reached the corridor, he let his breath leave his body in a careful stream. He did not fear the water. He feared failure. It would make everything that followed uglier. Afternoon sagged toward evening in the way battle days do, as if the sun did not dare set while there were men still intent on finishing their sentences. Tyrion sent a note to the Hound and received back a sword, which was a sentence of its own. A brewing vat burst on the street of flour, and men cheered because they thought the foam was victory. On the river, a single ship drifted where no ship should be, and then corrected itself as if some god had given it advice. Davos and his men took a tower with the humbleness of carpenters. They admired its beams as they claimed it. Stannis came ashore at dusk. He did not ride a fish. He rowed a boat, like any man who wishes to pay attention to the water. He stepped onto the stone as if it owned him, and he had come to collect rent. He did not raise his sword. He did not shout. He looked, once, up at Maegor's holdfast where a queen wore gold like a blade, and then he looked down and saw a boy with hair cropped ragged calling orders in a voice that had grown too large for his chest. The boy had a mouth too ready to tell men they belonged to Psalms. Stannis did not like him. He did not disdain his usefulness. "Hold," Stannis said, and the boy stood as if a hand had pressed him flat, which Stannis liked better than liking him. Davos came to his king with blood on his sleeve and river on his boots. "The old fish market gate," he said. "The old ironmonger's lane. The scene behind the wool store. We have hands on them. They will not tear if we hold them and do not lean. The chain is there. The jars have not flown. We can walk through if we are quiet. If we are loud, the city will remember it knows how to scream." "Quiet," Stannis said. He touched the pommel of his sword once, in the way some men touch the shoulder of a child they are not used to being gentle with. He looked at the sky, which had discovered its own redness and was embarrassed by it. "Where is she?" Melisandre emerged, when a shadow swam over the face of the last light. It made her appear to be arriving from somewhere closer to evening than other people could go. Her eyes found the city's heights and warmed. "I have seen it," she said, and her voice made the hairs stand at Davos' nape. "A new king in a city that has gnawed every bone thrown it. A stag that does not run when torches come. A sword in darkness. And a man in silk who weeps into his sleeve and calls it rain. Mensawa." "Then you should be pleased," Stannis said dryly. "You like your victories lit by strange fires. I like men to find out who they are," she said. "Fire does that more honestly than anything." Stannis' mouth thinned. "You will stay with the fleet," he said. "The river eats men who bring it tricks. I will take the city with locks and hinges, and there will be no performances on the walls." He did not look at Davos. He did not need to. Davos stood straighter not because he agreed with Melisandre, but because he loved plain things. And this was plain. The first place that would have broken into a riot of steel held. The second nearly did not. There, a boy with a spear found that a spear is a question and requires answers most boys do not have at hand. He made one anyway. Badly. And lived because a man with 2 fewer fingers than anyone else had developed the habit of being where things tipped wrong. Davos' arm ached when he raised it afterward. He did not think about the man he had stabbed. He thought about his king walking under him along a passage that had been built for grocery boys. They passed beneath a room where someone was laughing. Laughter is contagious in cities the way fever is contagious, but this was the other kind. The sort that makes men remember the marrow of the bones they begrudge. It left a smear on the evening. It did not belong to joy. Davos glanced up, saw nothing but ceiling, and kept moving. At the king's gate, Tyrion felt the moment his plan lost its arrogance, and decided to settle for utility. There is a sliver between those things that can slice a man's pride into manageable strips. He leaned into it. He ordered the jar men to move left, then right, then nowhere, because nothing that burned would be as useful as the idea of burning now. He sent men to put out fires that had not been lit. He laughed at a joke Bronn did not make. He watched the hound arrive and stand and not bolt. He watched 3 men he had not met before lay down their swords because they had seen someone lay down a sword and wanted to copy the gesture because it looked easier than victory. He watched 5 others pick up those swords and teach the 3 what happens to imitators who do not inherit the meaning of what they imitate. "I can hear the bells," Bronn muttered. "Yes," Tyrion said. "They are counting what happens to us." At Maegor's holdfast, Varys walked into a room that had been kept intentionally too cool. The food on the sideboard smelled of fruit, and the assumption that fruit would be eaten by people interested in food. Cersei was not interested in food. She stood with a goblet and a smile that was miles away from everything and wanted to be given directions. "Is he dead?" she asked. "Not yet," Varys said. "Which he?" she asked. "Yes," Varys said gently. She laughed, and the laugh took her over a small cliff. "You will have to choose soon. Did you think you could keep all your little threads and not be seen walking on them? Men are watching you now. Not just my brother. Not just mine. The city has eyes it did not have this morning. Now. Then I will be beautiful," Varys said, "and they will forgive me my sins for the pleasure of discussing them later." It took until moonrise for the new sound to begin. It was not a bell. It was a breath that many men take at once when they have realized the knife is somewhere they cannot see. It moved through streets and up walls, and along iron like a tide that discovered land, existed only to teach it how to curl. It entered the great septi, and extinguished 3 candles without fingers. It passed a window where Sansa Stark had fallen asleep, sitting up, one cheek creased by a lattice pattern, and laid a cold hand on her dreams, so that she woke believing she had been touched by someone kind. It found Tyrion and laid its weight on his shoulders, and he bowed his head because pride had set bones there that could not bear it upright any longer. It skipped past Varys, who recognized it as his work except not by his hand, and he bowed his head too, because even men who think they have written all the pages of a city must close their eyes when a new chapter is opened by someone else's breath. At the old fish market gate, a man dragged a cart backward to make room for someone else to run forward, and discovered that he had been holding his breath for an hour. He let it go, and the sound he made became part of the sound the city was making. Davos stood with his back against a post and counted the men who came through and the men who went out, and discovered that he still remembered how to do sums by touch. He smelled onions, old fish, a woman's hair oil, and blood. Stannis Baratheon walked into a courtyard that had been designed for archery practice 3 kings ago. He did not draw a bow. He stood there and waited for men to notice him. When they did, there was a kind of relief, like the moment a man admits he has cut himself shaving and stops pretending he is still a boy with a smooth face. Some men threw themselves forward. Others held back, waiting to see whether the air itself would choose for them. "Lord Stannis," a voice said. And the voice did not belong in this place. It belonged to cells and suppers alone. It belonged to knives that could not be held by men who had grown up with both hands. The voice was Varys, and it moved like oil along stone. Stannis found the eunuch's pale oval face and stared a hole into it. "When this is done, I will speak to you," he said. "I do not know whether you have saved my men or fed them to a dragon. Kings with sense wait until they know who has salted their meat before they heap thanks." "Ben bow." Varys bowed, a hinge-perfect movement. "I have always admired your discernment, your grace." "Do not call me that until I am a king in more than a woman's mouth," Stannis said, and turned away. There was a brief, bright thing then, where men who had expected to die learned they might not, and men who had expected to live learned they might, and in that place of exchange, decisions got made that would have been unthinkable when the day began. Someone opened a door because they could not bear not to. Someone closed a door because they could not bear what would come in. Somewhere, a man who had sharpened a sword for 2 months used it, and discovered that men's bellies were weaker than pigs, and therefore more disappointing. Somewhere else, a boy who had lied about everything told the truth once, and made it to sunrise. Those things belonged to the city, and the city would keep them. Night settled. The moon made a poor lamp. The bells kept their dignity. Varys moved along his passages and never once smelled smoke in a place where he had expected it. He had promised himself, very carefully, not to imagine children on fire. Tonight, he was spared that exercise of discipline. On the river, jars that had been counted sat dumb. Men would tell stories about why. Gods would be thanked and blamed. Tyrion would be cursed for cowardice and praised for cunning by the same mouths in the course of a week. He would learn to let their mouths live and go on chewing. He was good at that. Near midnight, Varys stood in a small court that had not decided whether it wanted to be private or public, and watched a man with his crown in his hands and his eyes on the ground. There was no crowd to witness. Those would come later, with their hungry eyes. Now there was a white dog asleep by a barrel, and a sailor vomiting quietly into a palm. Stannis lifted the plain circlet and did not put it on. He looked at Davos. "What would you have of me, sir?" he asked. Kings do not often ask men that, not before dawn, and not when there is so much left to do. But Stannis had always known the value of an honest ledger. "Bread," Davos said wearily. "Water. And then justice." He glanced around them as if he expected justice to be leaning against a wall, smirking. Not the kind that satisfies a god for show. The kind that makes men stop being afraid to sleep. Stannis made a sound in his throat that might, in a gentler man, have been a laugh. You ask a king to do small work. I ask a king to do work no one else can begin, Davos said. Stannis nodded once and set the crown against his own chest as if to warm it from the outside. Very well. Varys went away then. He had done enough watching for one night. He climbed through his lamplit places and found his chamber with its one cold candle and its letters like corpses waiting to be claimed. He broke the seal on Illyria's scroll and read the promises and the cleverness, the gold-wrapped names, and the anointed predestination of a boy who would be beautiful if given the chance. He read of ships and sellswords and banners that had not yet learned to be tired. He read finally of the realm which had been made into a word high enough to take all the weight men would not put on themselves. He sat with it until his spine ached, and the room's corners began to soften into places where a man might imagine safety. He blew out his candle and spoke into the dark the truth that had taken him this long to learn to say without choking. I have no use for princes who have never eaten the city's bread. Morning would ask for 1,000 things. Lists would be written. Punishments would be proposed and commuted and altered. Petyr Baelish would arrive wherever he was intending to arrive with a smile, like a landlord. The Iron Throne would cut someone. Cersei would pour wine and make promises to herself that would poison others. Tyrion would count the survivors and discover that numbers make their own kind of grief. The Red Woman would stand on the quay and smile into the sun and see shapes that did not frighten her because she had made room for them inside herself, and that made them small. Davos would seek his king and offer him the truth men rarely give kings. That a city is not only gates and bells, but breakfasts and promises kept in small kitchens. Stannis would nod and add both, as if they were items in his day's work. And Varys would go to a boy who had slept on his feet and tell him a story about a man who did not keep all his promises and therefore became useful. He would say it lightly. He would give the boy honey, sugar, and almonds. He would forget to keep one for himself and then remember. The city breathed. It had learned a new rhythm in the night and was trying it on. In certain places, in the corners where light is made careful by old women, men who had intended to follow one king woke with the new one in their mouths and found that it did not taste as strange as they had feared. On the river, fish bumped against the chain and swam away, unimpressed. The pyromancers counted their jars with the relief of men who had paid for a wedding feast and been spared the bride. What had been done was not complete. It never would be. It was only a beginning with better locks than some. But the spider had moved his web, and the bare wind that had threatened to flay the realm found silk where it had expected only skin. In a house whose shutters had not been opened in 2 winters, Varys allowed himself an unbecoming thought. It was that he had been right to prefer a man scoured by wind to a boy perfumed by plan. He let the thought stand up and walk around the room, then made it sit again, because vanity is a child and must be given tasks. He rose. The day's work would be to keep men from becoming monsters because they had learned they might be safe. He had never had a harder task. He tied on his girdle and pulled on his silence and went out to meet the city he had helped to midwife into itself. And the city, amused and unamused by turns, lifted its skirt to keep it out of the blood and grinned at him with most of its teeth intact. Oh. By the time the baker's fires were a comfort rather than a plea, the city's noises had found a new order. They did not hum yet. Humming belonged to peace. They ticked, clinked, scraped, breathed. Men who still wore last night on their faces lifted shutters as if they had been told to do it by an honest morning. Davos Seaworth walked among them with the particular gait of a man who had learned to keep his balance on decks that had never loved him. He had a list in his head and another in his hand. The list in his hand named streets and numbers of loaves. The list in his head named faces, hungry ones he had passed in alleys last winter, a woman who braided her daughter's hair with fishing line, a boy whose name was either Petyr or Petyr, depending on who spoke to him. He had always done sums with faces attached. It made the sums slower. It made the sums worth doing. At a corner where the fishwives came to argue in peacetime, the city had found an orderly miracle. 6 tables stood under awnings patched with sails. At each table, a woman with hard hands took a chalk mark from a wrist and returned it as a round of bread. The breads were not the same. Some came out of ovens where a mason had sorted stones with more care than he had ever given to choosing a wife, and their crusts sang. Some came from pans that had known only low heat and bad flour, and had to be eaten that day or not at all. A boy with a scraped knee presided over the line with grave authority, tapping shoulders if they pressed too close. Davos watched a man think about stealing, abandon the thought, and step back. He could not have said why it pleased him more to see temptation leave a face than to watch a blade turn a plan into a corpse. Half now. Half later, Davos told the woman at the third table, who frowned because that meant she would have to admit uncertainty to herself twice today. We don't know yet if the wagons from Storm's End will arrive by dusk. We don't know yet what generosity. He bit the word in two, because it had grown tender in his mouth. The nobles will prove capable of when the sun is low. Promise less at noon, give more at night, and you will sleep without feeling a finger on your shoulder. The woman snorted. You be my finger. She said, I don't want any other. I am many men's finger, Davos said, and walked on because the city kept trying to become his, and he would not let it. Above him, on the parapets of the King's Gate, Tyrion Lannister leaned between merlons and watched a pair of cats argue over a fish head. They were sleek, despite a famine that had never learned to be ashamed, which meant there was food somewhere no one had yet told him about. Good. Secrets kept cities upright. He breathed the smell of new bread, as if it could cancel the stink of fear he had inhaled all night. He had not slept. Sleep would have been a confession he had not earned the right to make. Someone will write a song, he told Bronn, who grunted, because Bronn's contempt for all forms of music except coins hitting a table was profound. They will lie about the number of bells, the number of men, the width of the river. They will put me in the wrong boots. They will put you in nicer boots. The truth will be this. The city was taken by counting. Bronn scratched his jaw. Counting and doors. Yes, Tyrion said softly. Doors are the city's way of confessing it is weak. The eunuch, Bronn said. The eunuch, Tyrion echoed. He smiled without mirth. He has saved us so that we may yet be of use to him. I find myself perversely grateful that we are so damned useful. He thought of Cersei and poured the thought out as if it were stale wine. He had not seen her since the hour before the gates had bowed. He could read her movements in the motions of men sent to and from Maegor's holdfast, the way a lawyer reads a purse's contents by the weight it gives a hand. She had not fled, because flight would force her to admit she had nowhere to go. She had not set herself alight, because that would require believing that anyone would weep. She was waiting for a man to deliver her a reason to cut her hair. They've taken the old fish market, Bronn said, and the scene behind the wool store. Word is there's a new king in a city that's muttering about the price of bread. I suppose he wants to be told he has a fine mutter. He wants to be told what it hides, Tyrion said, and pushed away from the stone. When Stannis Baratheon held a court at morning, it was not a court by sound. He had no trumpets in his mouth. It was a court by the weight of eyes on him, and by the way men stood when they had decided either to hate or to obey. He had considered kneeling to pray, had declined in case a god took kneeling as consent to meddle. He stood under a ceiling that had been painted in some former reign to show victory as a series of white horses, running in a circle, and addressed the room as if it were a ledger with a damp page. Bread first, he said. Water second. After that, names. He had 3 scribes, because he did not trust any one hand not to cramp. Men who opened gates. Men who tried to close them. This is not a day for guesswork. He looked at Davos. The bakers. The ovens all day, your grace, Davos said. He did not step forward until he had wiped a streak of blood from his boot heel. Because a clean line tells a story better than a smear. Half now. Half later. So we do not promise what wagons cannot bring. Good, Stannis said. It was enough praise to keep Davos warmer than wine. A servant announced, Lord Hallan of the Alchemists. Hallan came forward with the look of a man who has survived his own prophecy. He bowed with admirable wilt We are most pleased to have been spared unnecessary demonstrations, he offered. Stannis' gaze did not flicker. Will your jars be kept? Count them and count them again. One man will have the number in his mouth who does not work for you. If I see one set in motion without my order, I will have your name unlearned by every apprentice you possess. He paused to beat. And I will burn the rest. Halland swallowed. He might have found gratitude somewhere under terror if he rummaged. He withdrew. His great responsibility lightened to a burden, and therefore easier to carry. Varys, Stannis said next, without looking to see whether the eunuch had so much as breathed in the last minute. Men who are certain of guilt or innocence call you. Men who are uncertain summon you. Varys stepped from a column shadow as if the column had owed him a debt, and had just paid it. He arranged his sleeves. He stood at a distance that would not insult, would not endear. You have served kings, Stannis said, and the times between kings. You have served the city, or yourself, or the realm, if it pleases you to say so, as if those were not three different matters. You sent me a letter. You advised me where to put my hand upon this city's skin. You profited perhaps by the doing. Then to Hawan. Varys made a small motion with his head. Not assent, not denial. A wage, paid on time. I have kept cities from devouring themselves to bones and cats, your grace. Men flatter themselves that their banners matter. The truth is, grain and fear change colors faster than cloth. I have tried to keep both in manageable shades. You will keep trying, Stannis said. Under me. The room shifted, very slightly, and not only in Varys. The eunuch's smile was what a man offers a child who has found a poisonous toad and insists on calling it handsome. It will be an honor, he murmured, and meant that it would be a task. Stannis gestured to a soldier near the door. Bring me Janos Slynt. The shift became a sound, a little scrape of boots and air through teeth. The name had been a rumor all morning. Half of the city believed him shipped to the wall months ago, his absence the proof. The other half had seen him in taverns and storerooms since, a man who could not bear ships and had embraced delayed duty as a philosophy. The truth was smaller and therefore more powerful. Money had slowed him, then wine, then Varys. The sum of delays had become a life. Janos Slynt came in with the waddle of a big man, attempting to occupy less space than he had paid for. He looked at Stannis as he had once looked at butchers who were taller. He reached for insolence and found it had been stolen overnight. You were ordered to the Night's Watch, Stannis said. You did not go. Janos opened his mouth. Varys lifted a hand as if to applaud a play that should not be performed. Stannis did not look at either of them. You sold your honor for coin and comfort. You waited to see which wind would fill the city's sails and have come to me carrying your own belly. Do you have an answer that is not a whine? Janos' face performed a few ugly looks and settled on indignation, which was what it knew how to do. I have served. You slew newborns in their mother's arms, Stannis said, and his voice did not rise. It simply deepened like a sea. Do not imagine that the name you served will soften that act. The city will not be taught that men can do such things and be sent to a cold wall to discuss them. Then? Davos did not move. He did not look at Melisandre, who stood with her red smile and eyes bright as a brazier. Justice is a god that demands a clean floor, he thought. He did not enjoy watching. He had learned not to look away. Take him, Stannis said. At noon. Not on a square where men have learned to cheer. On the Riverwalk, where the water can see. Janos made a sound like a jar being opened without a knife. He lunged with words, found no purchase, and was removed with a dignity not his own. The hall exhaled. Melisandre watched Stannis as a smith watches a blade when the water takes it and the steel sings. She liked his temper better when it looked like that, tight, cold, edge-sure. It reminded her of the way flames can learn to be small, and therefore hotter. King's blood runs in these walls. She said softly to him as the next petitioners approached. An offering at night would make the day obedient. An offering, Stannis said, will make the city afraid to sleep. Fear is an old god, my king, she whispered. I have made friends with newer ones. Davos felt his hand close on air and find it a handle. He stepped forward before Prudence could nail his feet in place. "Your Grace, there is bread to command yet. And water. Leave the making of enemies to those enemies already made." Melisandre's eyes glowed, and for an instant Davos saw reflected in their red the idea of himself as driftwood, charred and yet floating. "You fear." "I have always feared," Davos said. "I have lived because I fear. Men who do not fear find themselves dead and make epitaphs out of the names of gods." Stannis' mouth twitched, a private argument with itself. He turned away from Melisandre without scorn. He did not need scorn. Disuse did the work for him. "Bread," he said again. "Water." He looked to the scribes. And then names. By midday, there were more names than there were clean places to set them. The gold cloaks had split in their minds and then in their bodies. Some had placed their love where their coin came from, and some had placed it where their children would sleep without strangers climbing in windows. Tyrion made a show of punishing neither choice too swiftly. Men need to be convinced that they are not idiots. Then they can be asked to be brave. He found Varys in a cloister off the small council chamber. The light there like milk poured thin. They stood on either side of a table upon which someone had left a peeled orange, the rind drying into a brown question mark. Tyrion picked up a wedge and made himself taste something that wasn't fear. "I would like you to admit to me," he said without preface, "that you did not wake this morning intending to hand me my head." "I woke this morning," Varys said, "with the intention that you should be alive at Vespers. I am pleased to find that my ambition was not too large." "You sent him," Tyrion said. "You sent Stannis to our doors. I am too tired to pretend I do not know." "Yes," Varys said gently. "Which makes me either your enemy or your proof," Tyrion said, rolling the remaining orange flesh against his tongue like a coin he would pay back later. "I have not yet decided." "Do not decide today," Varys counseled. "Decide when you have slept, and when your sister has ceased to consider throwing you from a parapet, because it would be the fastest way to enjoy gravity, without breaking a nail." Tyrion laughed despite himself. "She is thinking of something larger than parapets." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Did you help Janos delay his leaving?" "I helped him fail to remember his departure," Varys said. "It is a service I offer men who are useful precisely because they are unwise." "Stannis will kill him." "Stannis will kill him," Varys agreed. Tyrion set the orange wedge down very carefully, as if it had become fragile. "What do you intend for me?" Varys tilted his head. "You intend for you. I have no intention powerful enough to move a Lannister against himself." He softened the line with a small smile. "Survive, my lord. Make yourself so obvious a servant of order that no man can claim you carry a private knife. Men believe the city saved itself last night. Out of pride. Out of convenience. It needs faces to attach to that belief. Show them yours until the king's becomes familiar, and theirs begins to forget that their old banners were ever their mother's milk. Then why? And if the king intends to cleave me and all attached faces in twain, then," Varys said, "you will have given the city the habit of watching you be useful. Habits are hard to kill. Even kings must learn them." Tyrion wanted wine. He wanted sleep. He wanted to look at a field that had never seen a boot. He settled for setting his jaw. "And Cersei?" Varys looked at the orange rind, not at Tyrion. "She will make a choice between defiance that brings a spectacle and surrender that brings a stage. I have always admired her talent for making the wrong choice look like a revolution. She will snarl. She will bargain with hostages she believes she holds. She will bargain with hostages she believes she holds. She will break something valuable to prove it belongs to her." He lifted his eyes. "Be where the valuable thing is not." The valuable thing, at that moment, was Sansa Stark. She did not know it. She only knew that the room she had been kept in felt different now, when she put her hand on its table. Wood learns the weight of the hands that live on it. This one had known hers a little while, and had known too many others before. It decided to be kind and let her feel steadier than she was. A woman poured her water who had never poured it before. Sansa watched the careful way the woman kept the pitcher from touching the cup, the way her mouth held back words that did not belong to her. A different woman would have told Sansa a story to prove she had one. This woman kept her story in her hands. Sansa liked her. "The city has a new king," the woman said finally. She said it like a weaver names the color of a thread. "It matters, yes, but the weaver will make the cloth regardless." Sansa kept her eyes on the water in the cup. "Does he have a face?" The woman considered. "He has a jaw," she said at last. And something in Sansa loosened at the odd humanity of that answer. "What color are his eyes?" "Like night when you are not afraid of it." "And his hands?" Sansa surprised herself. Her mother had once told her that a man's hands tell you the story he thinks he is in. The woman's mouth pursed. "They are honest and unhappy." Cersei found Sansa at mid-afternoon because cruelty always remembers its errands. She did not knock, because doors are an admission of difference, and Cersei considered difference a personal affront. She came in wearing red, as if it were an argument she had already won. "Little bird," she said sweetly. "Look at you, unplucked and still here. How the gods adore their small jests." Sansa stood. She had learned to move slowly in rooms where quick steps made you pray. "Your Grace," she said. "Not for long," Cersei said, and lifted her goblet as if to toast herself. Some men intend to rearrange the names of things. It happens. It always looks impressive for a week. Sansa folded her hands. She had been a girl who could not see beyond the next ballad. She had learned to see to the end of the corridor. It had done. "Will you ask me to flee with you, Your Grace?" Cersei's smile sharpened. "Would you come?" "I would not," Sansa said. Her voice surprised her with its evenness. "I would stay where there is bread." Cersei's mouth did not move. Her eyes did. For an instant, they were a woman's eyes, not a queen's, lonely, furious, hard. Then the queen put them back on. "You are learning," she said. "Whose lessons?" Sansa did not answer. She had learned that silence was as versatile as a needle. It could prick and mend both. "Never mind," Cersei said, and turned her attention to the window. Outside, the city was busy refusing to choose between terror and relief. "Do you know what I will miss?" she asked lightly. "The sound of other women's envy." It was a pleasant occupation. It filled the afternoons. And no, Sansa thought of Lady of Snow, of her father's hands, of the smell of pine pitch and winter apples. She did not think of envy. It was a flavor she had never liked. "I hope you will find other occupations," she said, and the words were the politeness her mother would have chosen. They sounded odd in her own mouth. Too heavy. The woman who poured her water set the cup down very gently, and Sansa understood that she had been kind. Stannis Court ate names for a long time and spat out verdicts as crisp as crust. There were men to be rewarded who had opened doors, and men to be corrected who had tried to close them with their bodies and their tongues tied together. A few wanted to be martyrs and were refused. It is a sting to be told one is only ordinary and must continue living. A few wanted to be forgiven and were told that forgiveness would not be a word here this week. Men adjusted. Men always do. In the evening, when the city's light turned from yellow to the brown, it wears before a clean dusk, scouts came to the small door behind the hall and brought with them a smell that did not belong to King's Landing. It was the smell of grass burned gently by sun, of men who slept on ground clean enough to eat from, of horses that had not learned fear of alleys. It was the Reach. Tyrion heard the clink of harness before he heard the words. Bronn rolled his shoulders as if preparing to be disappointed by someone else's boasts. Varys came near without telling his feet to do it. "They camped at Bitterbridge last," the scout reported. Out of breath from the ride and more from the thought of what it meant to be the man speaking in this room. Tyrell banners. Red wine too. The lion with them. They sent outriders. They saw the smoke from the city and moved to the Rosby Road. They will be within 2 days if they press. Less if someone tells them there's a prize. "Someone will tell them," Tyrion said. "There is always someone." Stannis listened with the stillness of a man who means to hear everything once and not require it repeated. He had known this would come. Victory in a place like this is not a full stop. It is a comma after which ride men who love full stops. He lifted a hand, and the scout was tireless again. Send men to the Rosby Road, Stannis said. Not to be clever, to watch. If they light a fire within sight of our walls, I will have the name of the man who let them, and I will discuss with him the difference between sight and blindness. He looked at Varys. How quickly can I be reminded of the names of men in this city who will betray me for flour? Varys' eyelids lowered. Quickly, he said, and I will bring you the names of men who will not. Davos had not gone far from Stannis' side all day. He took the touch of his king's sleeve as license to speak again, though he felt each word's weight as if it had nails in it. Your Grace, there is the girl. The Stark girl, Stannis said. He did not sigh. Sighing is a coin wasted. There is always a girl. Davos saw his own boy in the girl's bent head, because fathers learn to see their children in every other child and are never freed of it. If you send her safely north, he said, you buy a quieter north than you would with 1,000 letters. Robb Stark will not be king in his mouth perhaps, but he will not be our enemy in his heart. Melisandre's voice threaded the space. The north will bend as wood bends over fire. The north, Davos said, and let himself be more daring than he had intended, burn slowly. If you push it over the flames, it will crack and smoke and send sparks to places you do not wish to look at. Stannis' jaw worked. He had never liked metaphors. They were not numbers. If I send the girl, I give up a hostage. If you keep the girl, Davos said, you keep a debt that does not pay. You have other hostages. You have the boy. You have the woman. He could not bring himself to say Joffrey's name. He was tired of boys used as the sum of a day's politics. Send the one that costs least and gains most. Stannis stared at the table that had heard so many small men pretend to be large. Very well, he said at last, and the quiet in the room told everyone that this was the sort of decision that earned belief. I will send her with an escort. One of my own. Not a Lannister sworn to me by dawn and forsworn at dusk. He looked at Davos. Choose the man and the road. Davos bowed, because sometimes a bow is a relief, a small rest for the spine. I will choose 3 men, he said. One to lead, one to watch the back, and one to know when to hide. And not you, Stannis said. You do not leave the city. Your honesty is a tool, and I have too few to lend any. You will be my hand when I have time to be a king. Davos blinked. The words struck him like a wave he had not seen coming. He had thought himself too old to be knocked back by a king's sentence. Your Grace, he began, and realized he had nothing ready that would not sound like humility begging to be praised. He shut his mouth. Stannis' eyes softened for an instant, and were the harder for it afterward. It is a plain hand I require, he said. A hand that counts and does not tremble when it owes. Do not make me regret it. On the Riverwalk, janitors with long brooms paused their morning's work to watch Janos Slint die. His mouth worked until the instant it didn't. Some men in the small crowd had sharpened their hatred for him into the day's only appetite and were surprised to find it dull in their mouths when it was over. Some did not watch. A woman with a baby turned her back and hummed. The river took the sound and lengthened it into something that sounded like rain. Varys stood at the edge of hearing and did not watch the man's face. He had seen too many. He looked at the boy leading the men away afterward, counted how many refused to look over their shoulders, and added their names to a list he kept that he never wrote down. In the Red Keep's upper rooms, Cersei counted bottles. It was a lie to say she was counting jars of poison. Poison is a hobby. She counted wine. The arithmetic steadied her. 32, 31, 30. She had resolved not to use any before midnight. She kept her resolves in numbers because men could not argue with them the way they argued with women's words. Joffrey sat on a bench with his knees bouncing and his hands making the shape of a crown around air. They say he is the king, he said, as if it were a drink he had tasted and found sour. They say he is the king. They say many things, Cersei murmured. She had dressed him in crimson and gold, as if the colors could insist on a history for him that Stannis' mouth could not erase. He had slept in his boots. She had not forced him to remove them. She preferred him ready to run. I'll kill him, Joffrey said suddenly. I'll go to him, and I'll. His hands remembered knives. He had liked it. The weight of power in a wrist. He did not remember the feel of a sword when it meets bone. Cersei put her goblet down in a line with 3 holes in the table's edge, and found the particular patience a mother uses to keep herself from shaking a child until his head clears. You will do nothing. I will do something. That should comfort you. He scowled with the force of a terrorized rabbit. They will take my sword. They will take your name if I let them, she said. I will not. She would, of course, if it kept her whole. She would trade a son for a life. She had done it every day since he had first drawn breath in her. The barter never admitted aloud. But she watched him and told herself the lie necessary to the hour. A boy believes it when his mother lies to him. She had learned men stopped believing sooner. With your leave, said a voice at the door, and Tyrion came in without waiting for words that would have turned an entrance into a fight. He bowed. Cersei's knuckles whitened on the goblet. Joffrey's mouth went open and small. They want your son, Tyrion said. And Cersei laughed too loud at the pronoun. They want him to say words to make their ears behave. They will take him whether we wish or no. We can make of it a dignity or an ugliness. Nandane. Which do you prefer? Cersei asked sweetly. I always forget whether your sense of theater extends beyond your own wit. I prefer the boy standing, Tyrion said. Men are clumsier with their ugliness when a child does not look small enough to crush by accident. Joffrey's lip curled. You think I am a child? I think you are a boy, Tyrion said. And that is a precise thing, different from a child and a man. I think you will go out where the city can see you. You will put your hands where they can see them. You will speak to a man with a jaw like a cudgel, and you will say your grace, and it will not kill you. Certain other things might, however. Should you try them? Bendaro. Cersei watched her brother as she had once watched cats in the keep's kitchens. If you learned their rhythm, you did not need to fear claws. You betray us to keep us alive, she said. You always were our father's son. And yours, Tyrion said softly. Remember that. In the sept that had not yet decided whether to ring for the new king, quiet lay like cloth over a table, kept for a meal that would not be eaten. A septon with good hands counted alms, which is a way of counting prayers. A woman lit a candle for a son who had decided to remain a thief rather than a voice in her house, and was surprised to find herself smiling at the memory of his first tooth. Melisandre came in without any of the movements other women make to draw eyes to themselves. She did not need them. She wore her hair like a banner, and her mouth like a cup to be lifted. The poor looked up and saw not a lady, not a whore, not a queen. They saw fire made polite. Melisandre liked this city less than Dragonstone. It smelled of too many confessions shouted down wells. But she liked the way its fear made her work easy. She knelt before the mother's altar and smiled at the statue, as if it were a woman who might disagree with her kindly. We serve different tables, she murmured, but we both carry cups to men who cannot bear to thirst. The septon came to show her a candle and to ask her whether she had come to mock them. Men look for the shape of their humiliation long before it arrives. It reassures them to be right. Melisandre placed a gold stag in his basket and laid her fingers lightly on his wrist. There is a longer night than any you have seen, she said. It will require more candles than those you have. You light none, he said, hoarse with the anger of someone whose faith has been asked to share a table. You come to command, not to kneel. I kneel to my fire, she said. You kneel to yours. Perhaps between us we will keep a child warm some winter. He drew his wrist back as if burned. She smiled, because truth often feels that way. She left him to his counting. She did not tell him that she had seen a boy's face in her flames who looked like a wolf fed by crows. She did not tell him that the man with the jaw had stood in her fire and had cast 2 shadows, one taller and one patient. She had learned the price of telling men too much of their fates. It made them indulgent or stubborn. The trick was to give them tasks that made fate look like duty. When dusk drew a long thread through the day and made men think of beds whether they had them or not, Stannis went where the small folk gathered without meaning to, at the end of the Street of Flower, where the ground sloped just enough to make them all feel as if they had leaned into the same story. He did not bring trumpets. He did not bring the Red Woman to stand behind him like a promise. He brought Davos and 3 men of the city watch who had spent their lives telling drunks to go home kindly enough to be obeyed half the time. They had made a platform out of planks and borrowed dignity. A woman handed Stannis a loaf as if that were the price of speaking. He took it and held it in his hand. "I have nothing to give you yet that you can eat," he said. He had never learned the trick of melting his voice for crowds. He spoke to them as if they were one man with a hearing problem. "But I have made men bring you food who would rather keep it. I will not ask you to cheer me for that. I did my work. Tomorrow I will do it again, and I will not ask you to love me for it." The crowd made the sound that a sea makes when it decides not to drown you. Relief, grudging, and real. Men like being spared the obligation to perform love. They do better when they can admire. "Black bread," Stannis continued, lifting the loaf. "For a while, then better. There will be a reckoning for those who imitated wolves with knives last winter. If you are hungry and afraid, go to the places named by the men with chalk. If you are angry, you may go to those places too. If you are rich, you will find these men at your doors instead." He paused. "I am here because this city is the lever that moves the realm. I am not here to admire your walls. I will be just. It will not feel sweet. It will feel like bread." "Menauer." A boy threw a cap in the air, more because he had never seen a king who used words like nails than because anything else had moved him. A woman began to cry, and did not know why, and did not want to admit that it was because the man had promised her nothing but toil, and it sounded like the safest thing she had heard in a year. Someone shouted, "Stag?" Someone else muttered, "Wolf?" And someone else, "Seven." It was a chorus of faiths. Stannis nodded once and stepped down. Davos felt something loosen inside his chest. He had not known had been bound. Not hope. Hope is a boy's word. He felt the click a lock makes when it takes a key fitted to it by a patient hand. Night placed its pawns on the city and pressed until the buildings creaked. Varys went to a narrow room where a bolt of silk covered a hole in the wall and sat like a penitent with his back to stone. He took out Illyrio's letter again and read it, not for the content. He could recite the thing now, but for the feel of it between his fingers. The wax seal had broken like an egg. The script was fat with an old man's contentment. It spoke of ships that would kiss Westeros shore as a lover kisses a long-lost mouth. It spoke of a boy schooled in books and lessons and small mercies. It spoke of the realm as a cradle for a sleeping infant, who would wake sweet-natured if only the right nurse crooned. Varys closed his eyes and let a different boy's face come. One with a mouth too quick to sneer, a name too heavy for his shoulders, a mother whose love devoured and a father whose love had been a mountain that fell on his own head. Joffrey. He thought of Tommen too, sweet and frightened, and of the girl in Dorne who would gain or lose her life for the shape of a name on court lips. He thought of little birds who had learned to run along walls without falling. He thought of a smith's bastard with the ocean in his arms, gone from the city in time, spared the night's games. The realm. The word had cost him much and returned to him less. He smoothed the letter on his lap, as if it were a thigh he meant to charm. Then he held it to the candle and watched the edges brown, just a little, not enough to betray wantonness. He folded it and sealed it with plain wax that said only what was necessary. Wait. He wrote 3 more notes, one to a captain who could count without being seen to, one to a woman who ran a house that looked like a place where men are told they are forgiven, and therefore bring their worst, and one to a maester who had learned to love anonymity as a virtue. He told them to listen, and not yet to answer their own questions. When he lay down, a peal of laughter drifted through the stone. Some drunk who had found the shape of joy in his cup. Varys smiled at the thought that, for once, the city's mirth did not feel like mockery. He slept without dreaming of kings. Before dawn, the hound found Tyrion in a stable that had not been used for horses in a year. It housed fear. You could smell it in the hay, old and matted. Sandor Clegane tugged at his glove as if it were the only argument he cared to make. "You still here?" he said. "And you," Tyrion answered. "No fire drove you to run, sir." The hound's lip twisted. "I will not burn for your sister's lies. I will not burn for the stinking red woman's truths. I will not burn for any man's song." He looked at the ceiling. He had always hated roofs. "But I'll keep my blade where a boy can see it. If that makes me useful to some new bastard, so be it." "That makes you a citizen," Tyrion said, amused at the idea that the word could stick to Sandor for longer than a sneeze. "There will be wages for such a thing." Sandor made a sound like pity and spit. "Keep your coins. I'll take my pay in not being forced to listen to prayers." He paused. "They'll be at the gate by sun's rise. Flowers and lions." "Roses," Tyrion corrected. "They like their poetry. The lion likes itself." "Then? You going to meet them?" "I am going to write a note that says, 'We have bread, you have horses. If you wish to exchange, come by day and bring no torches.'" Tyrion shrugged. "Then, I am going to see if my sister has thrown any plates." "It is a new era. One must keep inventory." "Tell your new king," the hound growled, "that if he burns the little girl to please the Red Witch, I'll feed him to his own horse." Tyrion looked at him, surprised into something almost like admiration. "I will carry the message," he said, and meant it. The Dawn Riders wore Tyrell green and gold in the clean way men wear colors who have not spent the last season boiling leather to make it last. They pulled up within sight of the king's gate and did not shout. They let their horses stamp eloquently. A man in a cloak, embroidered with as many bees as a drunk, would guess the world to have put his hand on his hip. Sir Garland Tyrell, Tyrion thought. Margaery's quiet brother, the one who fought like a man teaching a lesson. With him, a line of bright men who would be bored by slow blood. The parley on the second day was a conversation between men who had read different books. Stannis had brought Davos. Tyrell sent his clever knight and a squire with a good memory. Varys hovered where his shadow would be as long as possible. He had argued for speaking across a wall rather than below a banner, and Stannis indulged him because it is better to discuss terms from high stone than from ground that smells of old slaughter. "We have taken the city," Stannis said without ornament. "We have bread today and more tomorrow. We have men, many of whom are tired of being made examples of. We have the head of a man who killed babes." He did not gesture. There were limits to theater he would not breach. "What do you have?" Garland smiled the pleasant, baffled smile of a man who has shaved neatly even when the world has been messy. "We have a lord who saved a city once and would do so again," he said. And his eyes flickered just once toward the lion's standard that had not yet been lowered anywhere it could be used for leverage. "We have a king who believed he was a king. We have a bride who has been promised to a crown." "She has not been promised to mine," Stannis said. "Not yet," Garland allowed. Davos watched their faces. Word was a kind of stone Stannis threw. It landed where he wanted. Garland cast petals and let them stick to whatever would accept them. "The city could use both bread and flowers," Davos said mildly. And the two men looked at him as if he had suggested setting a table for a storm. "Stannis Baratheon is king by law. The Tyrells are rich by nature. One brings weight, one brings grease. If you press the city between them, she will not squeal." "You speak like a shipman," Garland said, amused. "I speak like a man who has been hungry," Davos said. And Garland's mouth's corner softened, which is as much as such a man allows himself when he is meant to be negotiating. Tywin Lannister did not come to the wall. He sent a note instead, in a hand that cut the paper like a blade. Varys brought it on a tray as if it were a small cake no one intended to eat. Stannis read it with his jaw clenched and passed it to Davos. "We have ridden to spare this city shame. It has earned none. The king sits in his house. I seek to preserve the realm from adventures. Stand down. Bring your debts to me. We will discuss them." Stannis laughed, a sound like a nail refusing to bend. "If he had come in time," he said, "I would have lost by fire. He has come in time to learn a lesson." He looked at Davos. "We will not collar the Tyrells. We will throw them a rope." Davos nodded. "Better to hire a proud man than to make him your enemy." "And the lion?" Lions starve on a plain, Davos said. If you do not bring them meat, let him camp where he can see the city and smell the bakeries and decide whether his honor likes that smell. He will not assault walls that will not give him a poem. Bah. The third day dawned with drums at a distance, and the city's new rhythm so brittle that a cartwheel could have cracked it. Tyrion sent messengers to Rosby and Duskendale with promises of exemptions, because money moves men faster than banners. He sent a private word to a man in the Tower of the Hand who had taught him the names of all the limners worth hiring. He would need a painter soon, to make the city recognize its new face each day until the old one faded in memory. He sent a second private word to a whoremistress who had never liked him, informing her that the coin to patch her roof would arrive by midnight if she promised to throw out men who spoke of kings while drunk. Cersei sent nothing. She sat with Tommen and braided his hair until he complained that his scalp hurt, and then continued, because the acting of tenderness reassured her that the organs in her chest still arranged themselves as a heart when referred to with that name. Joffrey fell into a sullen sleep at noon and woke believing he had been attacked by a shadow. The Red Woman did not come, and he hated her anyway. Sansa stood in a dress with the stark gray in it for the first time since King's Landing had choked on her father's name, and listened to Sir Robar Royce, the man Davos had chosen to escort her, explain a road she had never dared imagine. She did not cry, because she had dried that well. She did not smile, because smiling is an invitation to wolves and men alike. She touched the fabric at her hip, where a seam had been mended twice, and thought of stitches as promises. You could hold a world together if you had enough thread and knew where to pull. You will write to your brother, Davos said, when he came to see her before she left. He had scrubbed his hands, and they still looked like honesty. You will tell him that a king kept his word, and that you have been given bread and water, and leave to read in the evening. I will pay for candles because I cannot bear a girl reading in the dark. Dane. Sansa tilted her head, and for an instant, she was the child who had loved a story about a white stag. Why are you kind? She asked. Because a king asked me to be, Davos said. And because a girl will tell the truth better if she thinks she owes no lie. She lowered her eyes. Thank you. He nodded, awkward as a man being complimented on the shape of his ears. There will be 3 men with you who will die before you are lost. You will be clever enough to keep them from having to prove it. She looked up again. I will, she said. He believed her. That night, as torches traced gold petals on the Rosby road, Varys took a candle and went to a door no man would call his. Behind it, a boy with hair cut like someone's impatience looked up and put down a book he had not been taught to read, and therefore loved. Varys put a paper in his hands with 6 short lines on it, and enough coin for 3 men to become smoke, if called for. If you are caught, he told the boy gently, you must explain that you stole this from me. Tell a precise lie. It will save you. The boy nodded solemnly, like a little lord. Varys smiled and touched his hair as he would a dangerous animal that had decided, for now, to be tame. He came back through a passage that smelled of last year's wool, and found Melisandre waiting where 2 shadows crossed like swords. She looked as pleased as a woman can look without becoming unbearable to herself. You will not have him, Varys said before she opened her mouth. The boy, or the other. You will not burn them for a lantern to guide a king who has found the road. Nani. The night is longer than your pity, she said, close enough that he could smell the metal in her breath. The taste of coins held too long. Yes, Varys said, and colder. That is why men like you love it. It gives you work. But I tell you this, if you take a boy and make a song of his bones, you will find the city sings back, and your God will not like the tune. He smiled, genuinely. I will not either. She laughed, because she enjoyed being told who she was, by men who did not know. You are a spider, she said. You fear flame. It breaks your webs and leaves you no place to hide. I fear many things, Varys said, and collect them like rare wines. They have taught me what burns too quickly to be useful. She tilted her head, and the light caught her throat, where the ruby sat and pulsed, as if a very small heart had decided to live there. You think you have chosen a king who will save you? I think I have chosen a king who will not find me too flavorful, Varys said. And I think I have chosen a city that deserves a man who can tell the difference between sacrifice and waste. She glided away, and the passage grew several shades more human. On the fourth morning, the bell that had refused to ring finally spoke. It did not speak of coronation. It told the hour noisily, as if waking itself. Stannis walked through the street of steel to the place where men made swords into oaths. He looked at the forge masters with respect. The sort a soldier offers craftsmen who make his body larger than it is. He told them of quotas and pay and punishments. And they believed him because he knew the weight of a hammer. In the yard behind Tabo Mods, a boy with blue eyes watched him through slats and did not know yet that his life had been spared by chance and Davos' stubbornness. 2 summers ago, the boy spat black on his boots and went back to his anvil because the bell had told him to. At the same hour, Sansa rode out under a sky that looked newly washed. Ser Robar rode ahead, and 2 men in plain cloaks rode behind, and the city let her go without shouting, because kindness is a quiet work. She did not look back. She thought of the first time she had seen the city's walls, and believed them to be bright with a story she would get to enter. Now she knew the walls had stories of their own, and could not be read by girls. She thought of winter. She thought of a brother she had last seen with a smile. She had learned later was faith in things that could not keep a boy whole. She adjusted her hands on the reins and made herself light, so the horse would not feel her tremble. Tyrion watched her from a casement, saw the gray cloth of her dress like a thought of snow in the dust, and let himself have a moment of private relief that felt like laughter he dared not make. He dragged Quint out of his chair and shoved him toward the table. "Write a proclamation," he told the scribe. The girl returned to her family by the grace of King Stannis. Flour to be stored at the Sept of Baelor. No fires after midnight in the Street of Sisters. Anyone found using a chain to make a joke will be hung by it until they think of better humor. He paused. "And send a basket to the bathhouse by the river with raisins and dried figs. Tell the girl with the black hair that she may have a day without collecting secrets, and that this is a dare." "This is a dare," Quent repeated, appalled. "Exactly that," Tyrion said. "She will understand." He did not add, "And she will laugh at me again. And for a moment, the world will be as manageable as a cup, and I will not spill it." By week's end, the Tyrell host had stopped within sight of the walls, and spread themselves in a neat pattern that suggested patience. Tywin had halted farther back, because his patience made uglier shapes. They sent envoys. They received envoys. They counted bread and horses. They weighed letters as if the parchment itself could tilt their decisions. Marguerite Tyrell arrived like a rumor of gardens, only her banner and 9 men, and her smile packed away like a weapon. She came not to offer herself as a wreath, but to learn what sort of trunk would be asked to bear her. She stood with Davos in a hall where the windows made rectangles on the floor and asked about wells. He told her the truth and did not pretend that truth was a gift. She accepted it, which told him she had been given many luxuries that had not corrupted her where it mattered, and a few deprivations that had taught her the shape of want. "I have come to see whether this city will swallow my family whole," she said conversationally. "It has a small mouth," Davos said, "but sharp teeth. It chewed the last men badly." "And you?" she asked, looking at his left hand and the neat crop of his fingers. "Does it chew you?" "It tried," he said. "I have learned to be tasteless." She laughed, delighted, the sound earning him a warm look he had not known he missed. "I will like you, sir," she said. "That will be an inconvenience to your enemies." "Most things are," Davos said. When she met Stannis, she did not curtsy deeply. She folded like a reed, respectful, still. She made him look at a woman not as a vow but as a fact. He looked and found her a fact like a well. It existed precise, useful, unadorned. Once you stripped the petals away, he did not dislike her. He did not think of her as a queen. He thought of her as a treasury. "Your father," he said, "holds the roads. Your house holds the bread. I hold the law. My father holds the roads." She agreed. "My house holds the bread. You hold the law." She did not add, "And other men hold songs." Those would come unasked. Varys watched them from a doorway and thought, "This is how the realm likes its marriages," with counting done in silence. He filed away the tilt of the girl's head when she did not understand something, and the lift of Stannis' hand when he was avoiding displeasure. He saw the city's next months arrange themselves like dominoes. He wondered what shape their fall would make. He went from there to a court of mud where boys made kings out of sticks. He listened while they declared one another dead. He counted how many learned to enjoy that word and how many let it sit in their mouths like a worm. He took names. He tipped the old woman with no teeth who sold him a bowl of something that was not soup and told her to change her pot tomorrow, because he would bring a man with coins who would be disappointed if he could not pay too much for it. From the east came a gull one evening, as they often do. Bored of ocean, curious about cities, bringing nothing a man could write down. Varys looked up at its white lazy arrogance and thought, almost fondly, of a boy with a name he had not unlearned yet. Aegon. It was not a sin to prefer certainty to promise, he reminded himself. It was a sin to marry promise, when a widow was in the room, tired, fierce, and ready to be wed to law. On the 7th day, Stannis sat for the first time upon the Iron Throne. It cut him as it cuts all men. He did not wince. He looked out and saw not subjects but tasks. "Bring me the city," he had told Davos. Davos had brought him a ledger and a loaf. Varys had delivered a whisper and a rope. Tyrion had pinched his nose and counted archers instead of bones. The city had not burned. The river had not boiled. This was not peacetime. It was a smaller thing. Something like a truce with the morning. Sansa rode with her 3 men into a world that knew snow in its bones even when the sun was honest. At a wayside shrine, a woman in a gray cloak gave her a sprig of rosemary and told her it would keep the dead from asking for her name. Sansa tucked it into her sleeve and thanked her and did not say, "The dead know my name, and it is better if they keep it." She wondered what voice her brother would use when he said hers after so long. She hoped it would not sound like pity. She put her head down when the wind came hard and pretended she was riding down a corridor in Winterfell that had always been friendly to girls who watched their feet. On the wall of the King's Gate at dusk, Tyrion and Bronn watched the Tyrell fires wink into place, tidy as lace. "We are going to be bored," Bronn said hopefully. "Boredom is my new mistress," Tyrion said. "She is not beautiful, but she does not poison me." Varys came to stand with them, his hands folded like a prayer that had nothing to do with gods. They looked together at the neat enemy and the messy city. The wind from the sea made promises it would not keep. The bells did not ring. "It will not hold forever," Tyrion said, "because you must speak one truth to keep your tongue from drying into flattery." "No," Varys agreed. "Nothing holds forever except songs. And even those change their words." "Comforting," Bronn said dryly. "It is," Varys said, and his smile was a candle left burning on purpose so that a thief might see himself before he took what he came for. "Today, it is." Downriver, the chain lay heavy and unused, seaweed festooning it like laurels on a warrior who had not fought. In the alchemist's vault, old jars sweated politely and kept their secrets. In a queen's chamber, wine confessed to a woman who refused to. In a king's hand, a loaf cooled, still warm enough to bless. And somewhere between all those places, in a small courtyard, where a white dog slept and a sailor had learned to vomit without splash, a man who had never learned the trick of smiling without pain sat alone and let the city put a crown on his head without music. He set it there himself because he did not trust other men to get the angle right. The iron did what iron does. It bit. He bled with the practical surprise of someone who had never decided to spare his own skin. He stood. The city did not bow. It inclined its head slightly, as if to say, "Very well then, let us see." On the road north, Sansa looked up at a hawk. It wheeled, weightless, and then was gone behind a cloud. She did not think of songs. She thought of home as a smell. Wet wool, pine, hot bread. She pressed her fingers to the sprig at her sleeve until the rosemary gave up its oil. Her hand smelled of it for the next mile. She kept riding. Behind her, King's Landing breathed a new rhythm. Not steady, not safe, but real. Before her, the North waited with its cold honesty, sharpening itself as it always had on grief and time. Melisandre watched fire in a brazier, and saw not kings, but a wall of night, stretching like old leather across the top of the world. She saw a boy with a wolf, who would either burn or teach fire a new manner. She saw a spider whose web would catch him if he fell, and cut him if he struggled. She saw a stag in snow, unmoving until the snow decided to move around him. She smiled and placed a hand against her own breast to feel the ruby's beat. It comforted her the way a friend's lie comforts, a shape familiar and warm. Varys, passing her door, did not slow. He had lists to make, and girls to teach, and a city to imagine safe, which is the same as keeping it so for a day at a time. He had chosen. Choices do not end a man's labor. They begin it. He hummed, very softly, a tune from a play a troupe had mangled in Mar years ago. A comedy about a man who thought he could move a city by shouting and learned to do it by listening. It had not been good. He found that he loved it now. This city slept in patches. In its dreams, a chain lay in a river, and never rose, and bells learned a new time, and doors opened from inside instead of being smashed. Somewhere a boy learned that he did not need to kill to feel large. Somewhere a man discovered that bread handed to him without a sermon was an argument every bit as effective as a sword. Somewhere a girl murmured to herself the names of corridors and rivers as if they were prayers that would guide her feet. And in the still hour before dawn, when the air makes a sound like a thin skin being tested and not yet torn, the Iron Throne, iron cut and welded and hammered by men who had meant to frighten, held a man whose hands were honest and unhappy. It cut him again. He wiped the blood on his sleeve without ceremony, as if the throne were only another storm to endure, and waited for morning to tell him what justice would cost that day.